She was once the most loved woman on daytime television. Ellen DeGeneres had a smile that lit up the screen, a laugh that made millions feel happy, and a message that seemed simple: be kind. For years, she stood on that shiny stage, dancing, joking, and giving away prizes to her cheering audience. People believed she was different. She stood for love, for kindness, for breaking barriers. When she first came out as gay, it was a moment that changed television forever. She was brave, she was strong, and she made people believe in goodness. Her story began like a dream. Born in Louisiana, Ellen was just a regular girl trying to make people laugh. She didn't grow up rich or famous. She worked hard, doing stand-up comedy in small clubs, sometimes performing in front of just a few people. But something about her felt special. She had that rare spark that made people stop and watch. And then came her big break. Her own sitcom, Ellen, became a hit, and people loved her even more when her character came out on the show. Just like she had in real life, it was bold, it was history, and it made her even more famous. But that fame didn't come easy. After the coming out episode, she faced a lot of hate. People called her names. Some networks pulled her show. For a while, it looked like her career might be over. But Ellen didn't give up. She kept smiling. She kept fighting. And then, after years of struggle, she got a second chance that changed everything. When the Ellen DeGeneres Show launched in 2003, no one could have guessed how big it would become. Every day, people tuned in to see her dance down the aisles, play games with the audience, and interview the biggest stars in the world. She gave away cars, money, and surprises that made people cry with joy. She wasn't just a talk show host, she was a symbol of hope. Viewers saw her as someone who truly cared. The way she treated her guests, her crew, and even strangers on the street, it all felt genuine. And for years, that image stuck. Ellen became one of the most powerful women in Hollywood. She hosted the Oscars. She received awards. Presidents praised her. Her name became a brand. Her voice, a message. Be kind, that was her motto. She repeated it often, almost like a prayer. And people believed it. They believed in her. But behind that wide smile, there was a different story, one that the world was not ready to hear. At the time, no one was looking for anything dark behind the scenes. Why would they? Ellen seemed perfect. But as the years passed, cracks started to show. Tiny ones, a strange comment here, an awkward interview there, moments that felt off. Some fans ignored them. Others began to wonder, was it just a bad day? Or was there something more? Ellen's early life had already shown she was tough. She'd faced bullying, rejection, and loss. When her girlfriend died in a tragic accident, Ellen was still young. The pain stayed with her. She once said that this moment changed her forever. She felt alone, broken. That experience helped shape her humor, her need to make others laugh, because laughter was how she survived. So when people saw her laughing on screen, they didn't know the pain behind it. The success of her talk show was like a second life, a way to prove that she had made it through the storm. But what if that storm had never really left? What if it followed her into her fame, into the dressing rooms, the backstage halls, and the quiet moments off camera? Slowly, stories started to come out. Former employees hinted that things were not as happy as they looked. They spoke about fear, silence, and a workplace that didn't match the message of kindness. Still, this was early. Not many believed it. Ellen was too loved, too trusted. Her fans defended her. The media stayed quiet. But something was brewing, and it would soon become impossible to ignore. Even in the early days, there were signs. Some guests seemed uncomfortable. Some interviews felt tense. Ellen would joke, but sometimes the jokes were too sharp, too personal. People laughed, but not always because they wanted to. Behind the laughter, something didn't feel right. Yet no one wanted to believe that the Queen of Kindness could be cruel. It didn't make sense. It was easier to pretend it was all fine, that nothing was wrong. But Hollywood has a way of hiding secrets, big secrets. And the bigger the star, the deeper the shadows. Ellen had become one of the biggest stars on Earth. Her show brought in millions. Her brand was everywhere, but behind the lights, behind the fame, there were whispers that kept growing louder. And one day, those whispers turned into voices. Voices that would change everything. For years, Ellen had been at the top, but now, people were starting to ask questions. Who was she really? Was the kindness real, or just a script? And if the truth was darker than anyone imagined, how long had it been hidden? As fans kept watching, they didn't know they were staring at a story that was about to fall apart. Because the story of Ellen DeGeneres was not just about success. It was about what happens when the truth finally comes to light, when fame is tested, and when the world realizes that even the brightest smiles can hide the darkest secrets. My friend, remember risk. Stand up and think of me. I'm your friend. At first, everything seemed perfect, like a dream that would never end. But slowly, strange things started to happen behind the scenes of Ellen DeGeneres' shiny, happy show. People watching on TV still saw her dancing, smiling, and giving away gifts, but those who worked with her started to whisper that something didn't feel right. It began quietly, almost like shadows moving in the corner of a bright room. Some staff members felt nervous around her. Some said they were scared to speak or even make eye contact. These stories were not loud at first. They were quiet complaints, hidden in small corners of the internet, passed along like secrets no one wanted to believe. After all, this was Ellen, the woman who told us to be kind, who made millions of people smile every single day. But behind that smile, there were rules. There were moods. There were moments that no one wanted to talk about. Some workers said they were punished for small mistakes. Others claimed they were treated like they didn't matter. There were reports of yelling, of cold silence, of people crying in hallways, and yet none of it made the news at first. No one wanted to be the one to break the happy image. Because if Ellen wasn't kind, what did that mean for all the people who believed in her? But the whispers didn't stop. They started to grow. Former employees, some who had worked on the show for years, began to speak out. They said the workplace was toxic, full of fear and pressure. Some said they had to stay silent to keep their jobs. One person said they were told never to speak to Ellen unless spoken to. Another said they were fired after taking medical leave. These stories started to feel like puzzle pieces falling into place, each one making the picture darker. Viewers began to re-watch old interviews and notice things they hadn't seen before. Moments when Ellen made fun of her guests. Jokes that felt too personal, too sharp, too mean. Had we missed the signs all along? Was there something hiding under that bright and perfect surface? As these voices became louder, the internet started to turn. People who once cheered for Ellen were now asking questions. They looked at her motto, "Be kind," and wondered if it was just words, empty and cold. And then something even stranger happened. Some celebrities began to speak up, and their words were not all full of support. Some hinted at awkward moments backstage. Some said they were not treated well when the cameras were off. Others stayed quiet, and their silence felt heavy, like they knew more than they were saying. Still, some stars defended her, saying she had always been kind to them. But that only added more confusion. Why were there such different stories? Why did Ellen seem so warm to some and so cold to others? Was she showing one face to the public and another behind closed doors? And if so, how long had this been going on? People started to dig deeper, trying to understand when it all began to change. Or maybe it had always been this way, and we just didn't want to see it. More stories poured in. Former staff spoke about a culture of fear, where people were afraid to speak up, afraid to tell the truth. They said some producers acted with power and cruelty, and that Ellen knew more than she claimed. Some said she looked the other way. Some believed she allowed it. The idea that the most powerful woman in daytime TV might have let this happen shocked everyone. Could it be true? Could someone who spoke so much about kindness allow such pain to grow right under her nose? The network stayed quiet for a while. Ellen said nothing at first, but the silence only made people more suspicious. What was happening behind the scenes now? Were they trying to hide something? Were they afraid of what might come out next? As more and more people started talking, the picture became even more confusing. Ellen had built an empire on being nice. She was supposed to be the one person who made the world feel better, especially in hard times. But now that image was breaking, and people didn't know what to believe. Was it all fake? Had we all fallen for a carefully planned act? And if so, why did she do it? Was it about power, control, fame? The mystery deepened every day. News articles were written, headlines filled with shock and disbelief. Social media exploded with stories, opinions, and questions. Fans felt hurt. Some felt betrayed. Others refused to believe it, holding on to the Ellen they thought they knew. But the truth doesn't stay hidden forever. And once the first cracks appear, everything can start to fall apart. That's what was happening now. Ellen's world, once so bright, was slowly being pulled into the shadows, and no one knew what would come out next. Still, there was a strange silence from Ellen herself. She made no big statements, no real defense, just quiet, almost like she was waiting. Waiting for it to blow over, or waiting for someone else to take the blame. But people were no longer afraid to speak. They wanted answers. They wanted the truth, and they were not going to stop until they had it. The world that had once loved her now looked at her with doubt. Every old clip was rewatched, every word studied, every smile questioned. It was like people were trying to find the real Ellen, who she was without the cameras, without the stage lights, without the applause. And what they were finding didn't match what they thought they knew. The mystery was growing. The story was changing. And the truth, whatever it was, didn't seem as kind as the image she had shown us for so long. It all came crashing down when the scandal finally exploded, louder than anyone could have imagined and faster than anyone could stop. For years, the whispers had been easy to ignore, but now the voices were everywhere and they were impossible to silence. One by one, former employees, interns, staff members, and even outside guests came forward with stories that painted a very different picture of what was happening behind the scenes of the Ellen DeGeneres show. The happy, laughing, feel-good show that millions had grown up watching now seemed like a carefully built illusion. The stories that came out were not just about mean jokes or awkward interviews anymore. They were about fear, mistreatment, emotional pain, and even serious accusations of racism, harassment, and abuse of power from top producers. People said the workplace was not just difficult, it was toxic. Some said they were treated unfairly, shouted at, or punished for asking questions. Others spoke about being ignored, disrespected, or pushed aside, like they didn't matter. For so long, they had kept quiet, afraid of losing their jobs or being blacklisted in the industry. But now, they weren't afraid anymore. The curtain had been pulled back, and what people saw behind it was not kindness. It was something cold, something dark. And Ellen, the woman who had once been seen as the symbol of warmth and hope, was now at the center of it all. The news spread like wildfire. Headlines exploded on every platform. Toxic workplace exposed. The truth about Ellen DeGeneres, staff break silence. These were not the stories fans ever expected to read, but they were real. And each one pulled Ellen deeper into a storm that had no easy way out. The public reaction was intense. People who had once idolized her now flooded social media with anger and disappointment. Hashtags trended worldwide. Old clips of uncomfortable moments on her show started to go viral, and people watched them with new eyes. What had once seemed like harmless teasing or awkward jokes now looked mean, sharp, and even cruel. The internet picked apart every interview, every laugh, every moment, searching for signs of the Ellen they never really knew. It felt like the whole world had turned around to face her, not with admiration, but with suspicion. And the question that kept coming up was this: How could someone who preached kindness every day allow this to happen? Did she know? Did she ignore it? Or was she part of it? Ellen stayed quiet for a while, and the silence felt loud. People waited to see what she would say, what excuse or explanation she might offer, but days passed and there was nothing. When she finally spoke, it came in the form of a written apology, where she said she was sorry, that things happened she didn't know about and that changes would be made. But for many, it wasn't enough. The words felt safe, controlled, rehearsed. They wanted more than a statement. They wanted the truth. Some people still defended her. They said she couldn't have known everything, that she was only one person, and that the bad behavior was the fault of her producers, not her. But others said that someone as powerful as Ellen had to know. She was the face of the show. Nothing happened without her approval. And even if she didn't do the wrong things herself, they said she allowed it to happen. That made her responsible. Soon, investigations were launched. Warner Media, the company behind the show, opened a full review. Employees were interviewed. More details came out. Producers were removed. Ellen's name was dragged through every headline, every news report, every online video. Her empire, which had taken decades to build, now looked like it could collapse in just a few weeks. Sponsors pulled back. Ratings dropped. Rumors began to swirl that her show would be canceled. Fans were confused. They didn't know whether to be angry, sad, or just heartbroken. How had this happened? How had the Queen of Nice become a symbol of silence, power, and fear? It was like watching a perfect image shatter into 1,000 sharp pieces, and no one could put it back together. The damage went beyond the show. Ellen's brand was tied to kindness. Her name was on clothes, commercials, companies. She had a lifestyle brand, a game show, books, partnerships, all built on the image of someone who cared deeply about others. But when that image cracked, everything around it began to fall too. People stopped trusting the name. They stopped believing the message. It was more than just a talk show falling apart. It was a collapse of an idea, a feeling, a promise. And what made it even more painful was that people had really believed in her. They had watched her during hard times, through illness, through sadness, through fear, and she had made them smile. She had made them believe that the world could be better, but now they weren't so sure. And in the middle of it all stood Ellen, alone, quiet, and very different from the dancing, smiling woman people once adored. Her return to the show after the scandal was awkward and tense. She stood on her stage, looking at the camera, and apologized again. She tried to explain, to move on, to make it all better. But the energy had changed. The audience didn't cheer the same way. The laughter didn't sound the same. Something was broken, and maybe it couldn't be fixed. The mystery of Ellen's fall wasn't just about what happened behind closed doors. It was about how easily fame can cover pain, how a powerful message can be used as a shield, and how even the biggest stars can fall when the truth finally comes out. People were still watching, but not with joy anymore. They watched with questions, with doubt, with sadness, because the story of Ellen DeGeneres was no longer just a feel-good story. It had become something else, something darker, more complicated, and impossible to ignore. After everything fell apart, the spotlight that once followed Ellen DeGeneres everywhere began to fade, and what came next was nothing like the world had expected. For years, she had been one of the most powerful and loved women in entertainment, but now, after the scandal, she was silent, almost invisible. Her face was no longer on every screen, her voice no longer filled with laughter, and her once cheering audience had become quiet, confused, and distant. Her talk show, which had brought joy to millions for nearly 2 decades, was now surrounded by sadness, controversy, and a deep sense of betrayal. When Ellen finally returned to the show after the workplace scandal had become global news, everything felt different. She stood on the stage with that familiar smile, but something was missing. Her energy seemed smaller, her voice didn't carry the same spark. The people watching her from home and from the audience could feel that the magic was gone. And even though she apologized and promised to do better, something inside the room and inside the hearts of her viewers, had changed forever. Some people forgave her. Some said she was only human and deserved a second chance, but many others couldn't forget the pain in the voices of those who had worked for her, who had cried behind the scenes, who had felt powerless and ignored. The damage was too deep. The trust had been broken. As the final season of her show approached, there was no longer a feeling of celebration. Instead, there was a heavy silence. People didn't tune in the same way they used to. The joyful games, the surprise giveaways, and the celebrity interviews no longer felt exciting. They felt forced, like everyone was just pretending that things were okay. But they weren't. The woman who had once danced onto the stage every day was now walking carefully, her movements slower, her smile harder to believe. And when the last episode aired, it felt less like a grand farewell and more like the quiet end of something that had already died long before. Ellen thanked her fans, her staff, and everyone who had supported her. But many noticed how tired she looked, how her eyes didn't shine the way they used to. It was the end of an era, but also the start of something even more mysterious. What would happen to Ellen now that the cameras were turned off? What would her life look like without the show, the fame, the spotlight? People tried to follow her after the show ended, but Ellen seemed to disappear from the public eye. She stopped posting much on social media. She didn't go to red carpet events. She didn't appear on other shows. For someone who used to be everywhere, her silence was loud. Some believed she was hiding, trying to escape the shame. Others thought she was taking time to heal, to understand what had gone wrong. But no one really knew. Rumors started to swirl. Some said she was depressed. Others believed she had lost most of her Hollywood friends. There were stories of her spending her days in her huge California home, away from the noise, away from the world. Even the paparazzi didn't catch many photos of her anymore. When she was seen, she looked different. No makeup, no fancy clothes, just a quiet woman who once ruled daytime TV, now walking slowly through the shadows. Some fans hoped she was just taking a break and would return stronger. Others were sure she was gone for good, and that mystery of where she really was and what she was truly feeling kept people talking. So, it wasn't just the loss of her show that changed her life. Everything tied to her name had been affected. Her brand, once built on kindness, was no longer trusted the same way. Some of her products disappeared from stores. Her partnerships ended quietly. The companies that once proudly used her name began to remove her face from their websites. It was like the world was slowly erasing her, piece by piece. And the saddest part was that she seemed to let it happen. She didn't fight back. She didn't try to explain herself more or prove her innocence. She just stayed quiet, almost like she knew that the more she spoke, the worse things might get. Some people said that Ellen had become a prisoner of her own image, that the version of herself she had created for the public was so perfect, so kind, so full of light, that when the truth came out, there was no way to fix it. She had sold the world a dream, and when the dream broke, people didn't know how to forgive her for being human. And her relationships were questioned. Her marriage to actress Portia de Rossi had always seemed strong, but after the scandal, people began to wonder if things were as perfect as they looked. The couple stayed mostly private, but fans noticed that they appeared together less often. Were they still happy? Was Ellen pushing people away? Or was she simply tired of being watched, tired of pretending? The truth was, no one knew. The mystery around her only grew deeper as time passed. Every silence became a question. Every absence became a rumor. And in this silence, Ellen began to look like someone who had not only lost a career, but also a part of herself. The bright, dancing woman who once told the world to laugh and be kind was now someone else entirely, someone harder to recognize, someone who had fallen from the top and landed in a place she never imagined. As more time passed, fewer people asked about her. New scandals, new stars, and new shows took over the headlines. The world moved on quickly, the way it always does. But for those who had once loved her deeply, there was still a quiet sadness. They remembered the days when she made them laugh, when her smile felt like sunshine, when her show was the one place that felt safe. And now, that place was gone. And Ellen was gone too. Some still waited for her to speak again, to share her side fully, honestly, without the polished PR words. But maybe she never would. Maybe the silence was her final message. A message that said it was all too much, too painful, too broken to fix. And so, the mystery of Ellen DeGeneres' life after the scandal remains. Unfinished, unanswered, and heavy with the feeling that something truly bright had faded away, leaving behind only questions, regret, and the quiet echo of a voice the world used to love. After months of silence and disappearance from the spotlight, something strange began to happen that made people wonder if the story of Ellen DeGeneres was really over, or if something was quietly building behind the scenes. Just when the world had started to move on, whispers of a possible return began to float through the air. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't clear, but there were small signs, just enough to make people curious again. A quiet appearance at a charity event, a short interview in a magazine, a few blurry photos taken by paparazzi where Ellen looked different, older, more tired, but also like someone who might be planning something. It didn't take long for people to start asking, was Ellen trying to come back? Was she looking for a new start, or was she simply trying to remind the world that she was still here? Nobody knew for sure, but the mystery was enough to catch attention once more. Some believed she was working on a secret project. Others said she was writing a book. A few even claimed she might return to television, but in a totally different way. Not as a talk show host, but maybe as someone sharing her story, her truth, her pain. The idea alone brought out strong feelings from fans and critics alike. Some were ready to listen, some were not. But all of them wanted to know, what would she say if she finally spoke from the heart? This new silence was not like before. It felt heavy, like something was waiting to be revealed. Some insiders claimed she had been meeting with producers behind closed doors. Some said she had been recording voice notes, writing long letters, collecting her memories to explain what really happened, not just the scandal, but everything. Her childhood, her pain, the years of hiding who she was, the weight of being a symbol of kindness while struggling with her own emotions. Maybe the smiling, dancing Ellen was only one part of a much more complicated woman. Maybe she had lost control of the image she built, and now she was trying to take it back. Still, no one had real answers, just guesses and rumors. People who used to work with her refused to speak on the record. Some were still afraid. Others simply didn't want to go back to those memories. And that silence only made the mystery stronger. If Ellen was really planning something, why keep it so quiet? Why not clear her name, defend herself, or share her side before it was too late? Unless, of course, there were things she still didn't want the world to know. What if there were deeper secrets still buried? What if the scandal people had heard about was only the surface, and the real story was even more complicated, more painful, more human? Some reports suggested that Ellen had been deeply affected by the downfall, not just in her career, but in her personal life. That she had lost friends she once trusted, had cried behind closed doors, had gone through moments so dark that even her closest supporters didn't recognize her anymore. They said she spent most days alone, thinking, writing, trying to understand where it all went wrong. Not just the toxic workplace claims, but the years of pressure, the stress of keeping up the image, the fear of being exposed. Maybe she had been living in fear long before the scandal broke. Fear of being judged, fear of losing control, fear of no longer being loved, and maybe, just maybe, She was still afraid to return because she knew that no matter what she said, some people would never believe her again. But even in the middle of all this sadness and confusion, there were those who hoped for redemption. They believed that Ellen was not evil, not fake, not cold-hearted, but simply a person who made mistakes and let things go too far. A person who had been broken by fame and by the expectations placed on her shoulders. These people wanted to hear her story, not from the media, not from former staff, but from her own voice. They believed that if she came back, not with dancing and jokes, but with honesty and emotion, maybe the world would listen. Maybe not everyone would forgive her, but some might understand. Because deep down, the mystery of Ellen's fall wasn't just about power or fame. It was about what happens when a human being is forced to carry an image for too long and finally breaks under the weight of it. People change, people grow. And maybe Ellen was changing too. Quietly, slowly, away from the lights. Still, there was no big announcement, no dramatic interview, no public return, and that silence became part of the mystery. Was she done for good, or was she just waiting for the right moment? Some said she was waiting until people forgot. Others said she was waiting until they were ready to remember. Maybe she wanted to show a new version of herself, one that didn't need applause or fame or millions of followers. Maybe she just wanted to be herself, without all the noise. But the truth is, no one knew for sure. And maybe that was her plan all along, to disappear, to let people wonder, to become the unsolved story of Hollywood's biggest smile. The question still lingers in the air, even now. Was Ellen DeGeneres a victim of her own success, or the quiet villain behind a perfect mask? Was her fall a sign of justice, or just another sad story of fame gone wrong? Did she lose everything because she deserved it, or because no one can stay perfect forever? These are the questions that keep people watching, waiting, guessing. Because the mystery of Ellen's life after the scandal is not just about one woman. It's about how quickly the world can turn, how fast love can become hate, and how easily a hero can become a headline. And maybe that's the final twist in this story, that no one, not even Ellen herself, can ever really escape the image the world creates. She might return, she might stay gone, but either way, her story has already changed forever. And the silence she left behind still speaks louder than any words.